Hello everybody and welcome back to the Ant Holleufer YouTube channel. This week we had a member lamb that was olive green, but we have another video this week and it wasn't planned. So this week the member lamb is also yellow, chosen by our Holleufer helper being Mr. WaKooshi. Thank you. Now today we are talking about an experiment that really just failed. So just to give a little recap, back in 2020 I made a big Lasius Niger experiment. Now this Lasius Niger experiment had 6 colonies, 2 colonies with 1 queen, 2 colonies with 2 queens and 2 colonies with 3 queens. This experiment went way longer than a lot of people expected and it turned out a lot more successful, although in the end it had the expected result. But it was so interesting to follow and it was so unlike what people had suggested that I thought that, well, you know, this experiment went super well and super interesting. I'm gonna do another one. And that is where I found out that I would make the 2021 Lasius Niger experiment. Now the Lasius Niger experiment 2021 would be a lot bigger than the 2020, being 16 colonies instead of just 6. Now out of the 16 colonies, we would put 8 of them in a nest, 8 of them in a test tube, and just trying to talk about the experiment as yeah, it was way too complicated, but more on that later. With the 8 colonies in a test tube, 4 of them would be heated, 4 of them would not be heated. And out of those 4 colonies, 2 of them would be in light, 1 of them in red light, and 1 of them in complete darkness, being the black light. And the same with the nest, so out of the 8 in the nest, 4 with heat, 4 without heat, 2 with light, 2 without light. That's the basic experiment, but just trying to edit this, just trying to say this now is way too overcomplicated, and already here is where the experiment was a little bit doomed from the beginning, because having so many experiments in one already now made that, well, trying to get any real conclusion out of the experiment would be quite hard. But as matters are, today we do have quite a good conclusion. Now, today out of the 16 colonies, 3 of the queens have died, probably just due to natural reason, but what is really surprising is out of the 16 becoming 13, only 3 colonies made it to get their first workers. That is insanely bad for a Lasius Niger colony. Now, there's not a lot you can conclude from this experiment, but there's one thing. All the 8 colonies that lived in the nest all did terribly worse than the test tube colonies. Now, why is that? I think it's pretty much due to me having to go in and touch them. As in a test tube, you have the perfect environment. They have the cotton where they can suck on the water, meaning you only have to feed them. But when it's only a queen, you don't have to feed them, meaning you don't have to do anything at all. But with a nest, you have to hydrate them. And as these queens are clustered, meaning they don't go out to forage, you have to hydrate the gypsum enough for them to be able to lick on the gypsum, which isn't any problem. Again, when the colony get their first workers, you can then add a water source so they don't have to water the gypsum all the time, because then they can go out and get the water source. But as this was a Lasius Niger colony, being a fully clustered colony, I had to water the gypsum so they could drink the gypsum directly by licking it. Which isn't anything special. I have a few colonies that do this. They don't want to go out in the outdoor and get the water when they can just lick the gypsum. But this is where I personally started to fail, because this was the first time I actually worked with a gypsum block, and I wanted to make sure that the colony did not dry out. So I watered the colonies and the queens were happy, but then I got scared that they didn't have enough water, so I watered it again, and really quickly, within only, I think it was week 4 or something, all the colonies had larvae, and 3 of the colonies had larvae that was drowning in the water. So I had overwatered the nests, only some of them, but enough for me to really get a big scare, because the larvae were now in the water, the queens were trying to get them out of the water, and it turned out that out of the 8 colonies that were in the nest, 2 of them lost all of that brood due to me overwatering it, which really scared me. Now, since then, leading up to hibernation, I kept watering them, I kept doing what I needed to do, but just no workers developing. They just did not develop. And as we hit hibernation, 1 of them had died, and the other 7 were left with no brood at all. All the brood was gone. Heated colonies, colonies in the red, colonies in the light, non-heated colonies, no brood at all, only one dead. Now, this was really a big bummer, so I of course started to feed them once the other test tube colonies started to get food, because I didn't want them to be completely without food. But already now, looking back, there's not a lot of things you can safely say by this experiment, but one thing I can safely say is it's much better to just raise your colony in a test tube, at least until they get the first workers. That is where you can, at the earliest, introduce a nest, because the test tubes just work. You don't have to do anything. You can put them in a shelf and look the other way. Not with the nest. You have to hydrate the nest, you have to do things, and hydrating, human errors, all of these things are not good for a founding queen. She just needs peace. And you having to go in and hydrate and be scared that you over or underhydrate them. Now, if we just forget about all of these 8 queens in the nest and just look at the test tube experiment, this is where things should be a bit more interesting, but it's not. Out of the 8 queens in the test tubes, 2 of them died, both being one queen that is heated in the dark and one queen that is not heated in the dark. Random that they both were in the dark? Yes, definitely random. Now, out of the remaining 6 queens, 3 of them got their first workers. One of them was heated in dark, one of them was not heated but in red light, and the last was just not heated and just in regular light, meaning a colony just in the light. So what can we conclude out of this? Nothing again. Well, a colony with light got the workers, a colony in dark got the workers, a colony in heat got workers. So random, not anything to conclude here either. But saying that, I also now, looking back at it, don't think it was good to try the heated versus no heat. The thing about heating a test tube colony is, for a Lasius Niger colony, it's not needed. The thing you can do when introducing heat, just like with introducing you having to water the nest, is you are introducing human errors. Suddenly you can put a heat cable under them, and under a hot day, a hot summer day, it's possibly a lot hotter within the test tube. Now, it's no problem to heat a test tube if the workers just have a way of exiting the test tube if it gets too hot. But as these were simply test tube colonies, I don't think I boiled any of them. But the thing is just, you are introducing many more factors that may kill a colony. Now, if you have a tropical ant that needs to be heated, you can introduce an outwell, because worst case, if everything goes bad and the heat test tube starts to boil, they can simply leave. Again, with a regular Lasius Niger, you don't need to heat them, and what you're doing is simply introducing more facts and more errors to come. So if we just once more just remove the whole aspect of heated colonies, we are left with 4 Lasius Niger colonies remaining out of the original 16. Now we have 4 remaining test tubes. 2 in light, 1 in red, and 1 in complete darkness. And well, out of these 4 colonies, 1 got their first workers, being a colony in the light. And another colony got their first worker, being the colony in red light. Now, as many of you also predicted, and as I myself also pretty much predicted, there's no difference between the colonies in the dark and the colonies in the light. The only thing is I can look at the colonies in the light. Also looking at the brood in the nest, you couldn't see any difference between light and darkness, except with the darkened colonies, you're disturbing them when looking at them, not with the lighted colonies. Of course, if this experiment had run for much longer, well, then when we had to move the colonies, it would be a lot harder to move the colonies that were used to the light, because the whole aspect of putting light on them wouldn't work, because they were just, well, happy with having light on them. But with concluding that we have lost more colonies in darkness than in brightness, is it then safer to raise your colonies in light? No. Again, the problem with this experiment is there's way too many different small experiments within one big experiment. If I were to repeat this experiment, I would take the 8 nests and just forget about them. Just adding 16 colonies only in test tubes, then this test tube thing could be a bit more interesting to look at. Also the heat, just remove the heat. There's no need to heat a colony, at least if they are not required. You can add heat to a colony that is a bit more grown and have a nest, because the thing is, when you can heat a nest, well, the colony can adapt within, well, do we want the heated part, do we want the unheated part? And then you can look at the colony and say, oh, they're going away from the heat, probably not a good idea to heat them. But with test tubes, they can't go anywhere. They can go to one part of the cotton or the other part of the cotton, and you can simply boil them. So if I were to do this experiment once more, I would just take test tubes in light, in red light, and in darkness and look at it that way, because that would be safer and more interesting, and maybe some conclusions could be taken. Although that experiment part is the experiment part, I thought the least about, because to be honest, I don't think there's any difference between raising a colony in the light, in the red light, or in the dark at all. So what can we conclude out of this experiment? Well, I would never again recommend founding a colony in a nest. At least a colony without any workers. Again, the problem with the nest is you have to hydrate them. But with a colony that has a few workers, the workers can go over and get the water. That way, you are not interacting that much with maybe overwatering the nest like I did. But all in all, I'd just say this experiment was way too big, way too many factors, and that is the thing about doing experiments. Sometimes you just go a bit too overboard. Now, out of the 16 colonies, only 3 of them got their first generation of workers. Now, all of these queens were all caught within the same 4 meters, probably the same nest, probably the same colony. These queens may just have been bad from the beginning. They may just not have been fertilized. Maybe I should have taken queens from different areas instead of just all taking queens from the same colony. Maybe that's a bad colony. Maybe they were starved in there. Maybe they were not having the proper nutrition when they were flying. There are so many factors, but alone that only 3 out of the 16 colonies got their first sets of workers. It's just a stat that is probably the worst I've heard, at least the worst I've heard myself, because it's just a record bad queen batch. To just round this video up, this experiment was too big, and what I also learned by this experiment is I wanted to test a lot of things in one experiment. The experiment was way too complicated, and if I am ever to do another experiment on my ants, I'll just go with the simple and safe way where it's easy to say, yes it did go good, yes it did go bad. good grammatic. So before we end the video, let's just bring the members up here. Now we have a new member that I'm finally gonna talk about and not just put some text on it. But before that, a big thank you to Medical Carcase number 9 and Ants Norway for being Holleufer family members. Thank you. Also, a big thank you to our new member Fabi93. Thank you for being a Holleufer helper, together with WaKooshi, Hufflepuff, Stans, and maybe myself. Together with Antic. I'm not gonna forget you like I did in the past. Thank you all members. Maybe I should start writing it down so I just don't look at anything and just look completely wrong up and down on the names. Future proofing maybe needs to be changed right here. I maybe need to experiment a little. Oh yeah. Anyway guys, that has been it for this video. So I hope you liked this little conclusion. To be honest, today was supposed to be a Gen 3 video. Everything has been a little bit mental in here in Denmark. I was supposed to make all kind of different videos and everything was just pushed, smashed together, turned upside down. That's why I thought this little conclusion could fit in as the Gen 3 video came out Tuesday, I think. So quite insane week, and hopefully you'll see some more ant colonies in the near future, because I'm missing just recording the ants. So hopefully I can do that soon. Anyways, that has been it for this video. A big thank you to all the members, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Become a member today, if you like. And I will see you all in another video. Bye!